Welcome to Travel with Sean. I'm Sean. Today we're at the archaeological park of the ancient city of Philippi in Greece. If you're not familiar with the name Philippi, it was to a Christian church here in this city that the Apostle Paul wrote his letter to the Philippians, which is in the Christian Bible. We're going to explore these ancient ruins and take a look at where Paul preached, where he was imprisoned, and where he baptized.
Philippi was originally a colony settled in about 360 BC by people from the island of Thassos, located near the coast of the Greek region of Macedonia. About 4 years later, King Philip II of Macedonia conquered the colony and named it after himself. Nothing is really known about the city from when the Romans conquered Macedonia in 168 BC until the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, which saw the armies of Mark Antony and Octavian, later Emperor Augustus, defeat the armies of Julius Caesar's assassins, marking the end of the Roman Republic and the dawn of the Roman Empire. We start our tour of Philippi at the museum, which was built on the Acropolis, the highest elevation around. Let's go inside the museum now and take a look at some of the artifacts that were found here. Here are several coins found from the 4th century BC under the rule of Philip II and of Alexander the Great, his son. This relief sculpture and the stone box next to it were both found in a grave that dates from the late 2nd century BC. Speaking of 2nd century BC graves, this skeleton is of a young woman who was buried wearing jewelry in the early 2nd century BC. Here we have a bronze weight used on a scale in the 5th century AD. It may be in the image of Empress Evokia, who died in 408 AD. Leaving the museum on our way to the Roman Forum, we come across the ruins of a 5th century church. It collapsed in the earthquake of 617 AD. This map shows you a layout of ancient Philippi. That dark rectangle is the Roman Forum. This map shows a layout of the Roman Forum. Number 1 on top and number 22 on the bottom are both roads. 16 and 16A on the left are both parts of the Basilica, which was an official Roman government building. We're approaching the Roman Forum from the west, and the ruins of the Basilica are right here in front of us. The Christian Church adopted the name Basilica for some of its churches, and adopted that architectural style, a rectangular building with a rounded end called an apse. The Bible's New Testament book, called Acts of the Apostles, records a visit to the city by the Apostle Paul during his second missionary journey in the year 49 or 50 AD. Accompanied by Silas, Timothy, and Luke, who is the author of the Acts of the Apostles, Paul's visit to Philippi is believed to have been the first time that he preached on European soil. If you know the story of the apostles' visit to Philippi, then you'll know that they were arrested while they were here. The jail cell where they were held is among those structures far ahead of us on the left side. We'll get up close in a little bit. During the time of the apostles' visit to Philippi, they were preaching in Jewish synagogues and anywhere they could find gatherings of Jews praying, as they believed the Jews would be most likely to convert to Christianity. According to the Bible, when the Jewish Sabbath came Friday night, they went outside of the city to the nearby river, hoping to find Jews gathering to pray. The book of Acts says, "We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God." It goes on to say that she and her household were then baptized by Paul and the others. The reason this is so significant is that her baptism in Philippi was the first baptism in Europe. This church was built alongside the river to commemorate Lydia's baptism here, the first baptism in Europe. The Bible goes on to say that Paul and his entourage had frequently seen a slave woman in the forum making a fortune for her masters by telling people what the future held for them. One time, that slave woman started following them around, shouting to everyone, "These are men of God." Since she could only know that if she were possessed by a demon, and the fact that they were scared that Roman authorities might hear her, they drove the demon out of her. This caused her to stop having visions of the future, and her masters grabbed Paul and Silas and took them to a Roman government official, probably in or near the basilica at the other end of the forum. They would have been whipped in the middle of the forum for all to see, because this was the city square. After they had been publicly whipped, they were then escorted to the jail, which was across the road from the forum. While in jail, they would have been chained to the wall to keep them from escaping. That night, they prayed to God to free them and save them from this. And that night there was an earthquake, which made the chains fall off of them, and the door to the jail cell came open. They were free, but instead of running away, they stayed here and waited. The jailer came in scared to death because he could have been executed for not guarding his prisoners. After Paul explained how God freed them, the jailer asked how he could have such faith. Here's a view of the Roman Forum, looking from the jail cell. The apostles probably could have overpowered the jailer and escaped, but instead they ministered to him, preached to him. He became a believer then and wanted to be baptized, so he talked to the magistrate and got them released. Then he was baptized and served them lunch in his home. The Bible says after Paul and Silas came out of the prison, they went to Lydia's house, where they met with the brothers and sisters and encouraged them. Then they left the city. We don't know where Lydia's house was in Philippi, but this was the first Christian congregation in all of Europe. And it was to this church, this group of Christians, that Paul wrote his letter to the Philippians while he was imprisoned in Rome about 10 years later. East of the Roman Forum, we find the ruins of the octagon, an 8-sided Christian church built at the end of the 4th century AD, on the site of an ancient sanctuary and adjacent to an underground Macedonian tomb. Also among these ruins is the baptistry, where new Christians were baptized, and the bishop's residence, because it's believed that the octagon was the cathedral for a couple hundred years, the principal church of Philippi. It's believed it would have been very elaborately decorated, with pillars all around and mosaic flooring. Here we can see the original mosaic flooring from the 4th century AD. Mosaic flooring are made from individual little stones glued together to make a design. And you can see this church had a lot of mosaic flooring. Here some of the mosaic flooring has fallen apart, and we can see what's left. You can see where the stones were placed, the colored stones to make the mosaic, and you can see how they were glued together and shaped to make the designs. We saw star designs, but here we can see floral patterns with multiple colors. The design for this style of mosaic flooring is called the guilloche pattern. Next to that, we see the octagonal pattern, which is fitting considering the church was called the octagon. This part of the floor reads Prayer of Bishop Porphyrios. This church was built to replace an earlier church, and it remained in good condition until the beginning of the 7th century. It was likely destroyed in the earthquake of 617 AD. The city thrived in the 5th and 6th centuries AD, which is largely accredited to Paul's visits in the 1st century. Churches here are said to have been equally large and beautiful as those in Thessaloniki and in Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, Turkey. They may have even been larger and more beautiful than the churches in those two cities. Philippi's downfall is said to have begun in the early 6th century, when Slavic invaders destroyed the local farmlands. That was followed in 547 AD by an epidemic, said to be the same virus that was called the Black Death, or the Plague, in the 13th century. Philippi was hit by a devastating earthquake in 617 AD. War, famine, pestilence proved to be too much, and most of the population abandoned the city. After that, Philippi remained inconsequential until the 9th century, when the army of the Byzantine Empire saw its strategic military value, being located along the Via Egnatia, which was a Roman road built in the latter half of the 2nd century BC. The Byzantine army, though, was not the only ones to see the value of this city. It faced many repeated attacks and was conquered by the Bulgarians and the Serbians and the Franks, as the French were called in the 12th century. It's not known when or why the city was eventually abandoned, but the city's population saw a steady decline starting in the late 14th century, after the first arrival of the Ottoman Turks. When a French traveler passed by here in the 1540s, he noted that the city was in ruins. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that archaeologists began examining the city. But serious archaeological excavation didn't begin until 1914. This was abruptly halted in World War I, and then delayed again by World War II. So it wasn't restarted until 1954. Because of this city's significant historical, cultural, and archaeological importance, its outstanding value as a crossroads of cultures, and its role in shaping European Christian identity, Philippi was recognized in 2016 as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
So I mentioned before that Paul was arrested. Paul and Silas were in prison for preaching the gospel of Christ. This is exactly where they were. And then when an earthquake struck, it opened up. The jailer saw they were still there, and he became a Christian. This ends our tour of ancient Philippi. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your support. Until next time, bye-bye.